Creepers left and right, buzz like crazy. Everybody's trying to steal my lady. Spiders in the mirror and things can't be right. Back to the scene of a Friday night, to a blessed collision still frozen tight. Spill drinkers, Cupid and the sound of her first chime. And why did you argue? We're dreaming of those eyes, the best part of my life.
Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. It is so overcast here today. It's been raining and we've had thunderstorms, and so I can't quite get the lighting right. Crazy? I don't like that. But anyway, hello, welcome to another vlog. So this vlog, I am just starting a weekly vlog. We're going to go through at least 2 books, maybe 3, depending on if I finish my physical book, the physical arc that I'm reading. I might talk about that one. So I am currently in the middle, not even quite in the middle. Where am I even at in this book? I am only on chapter 10 of a romantasy or fantasy romance. So I'm about a third of the way through it. It is Rain and Ruin. So this is a romantasy that I have seen recently get talked about a lot on TikTok, and some of my TikTok friends who are more heavily into fantasy, well, not more heavily, but who also read a lot of just adult fantasy and like some romantasy, they've really been talking about this. And I have seen even some readers who only read fantasy and have tried this as like their first romantasy have really liked this one. So I've been really curious to see what it feels like. And a couple of them were like starting it as a group read, and I am really bad at doing like group and buddy reads and commenting and things like that. Mostly, unless it's for like my own book club, which I'm also not super great at on the Fable book club. I need to do a better job about that. I tend to reserve my thoughts for videos and things like that because a lot of times I'm still just thinking through them. So, Rain and Ruin is a romantasy, and it is based in Middle Eastern history, Middle Eastern basis for the setting and the magic systems. And we have our heroine, who is Naomi. She is the daughter of a sultan who is suffering from dementia, and he's slowly losing his mental faculties. And she is really hoping to take the place of Sultan. She wants to be like the sultan, the female version of a sultan. She doesn't want to just be married to like a son of one of the council members, which is what everyone is sort of pushing her to do. And so that's what she really wants to happen. She wants to be the leader of her father's people, of her people, and she wants to do that so that she can broker an alliance with this neighboring kingdom. I believe they're called the Sacrum. So it's not going super well, you know. She ends up just getting pushed into marriage when our hero shows up, who is actually the younger brother of the leader of the Sacrum people. He ends up showing up there, and he's also hoping to broker a treaty and alliance between their two people. So that's how they end up meeting, and they have opposing magic sources. So she has light magic, he has death magic, and they really complement one another and work well together. Their connection starts off really pretty slowly. They don't necessarily have like a very quick burn type of romantic connection, which I prefer. I definitely prefer a slow burn romance. I want to see them take the time to get to know each other. I don't want it to just be anything that feels superficial or anything that's really fast burn. I want a slow burn. So I am liking the progression of their relationship because it does feel like it is really slow. And I do really like the hero's thoughts about her. He is continuously talking about how beautiful she is, and I just find that really lovely. If at times it feels like it's a little bit too much, you know, I'm enjoying that a lot. And I like the heroine. She's very strong. She really has had to shoulder a lot of things in her life, and I like how she's really trying to rise up and take care of her people and do what's right. Obviously, she's had a lot to deal with as far as like sexism and things like that in that world, but I think it's really good. I'm really invested in it so far. I really want to keep going. However, I will say, you know, up until this last chapter, so I'm in chapter 10, I am listening to the audiobook. For the first 9 chapters were almost painfully slow. It was very, very slow. the kind of slowness that relies on a lot of setup and a lot of exposition and a lot of sort of relating history of how these people, how this world got to where it is today, and what are the ramifications of what may happen in the political world coming, you know. And obviously that's laying the groundwork for the plot that is to come in this book and in future books. But it feels like the thing that I think makes it read slowly to me is that it's giving us this history, it's giving us the setup for the political plot, and it is telling us how our main character is involved in that, but we're not really getting a ton of information about our character that will get us to feel emotionally connected with him, other than the fact that her dad has Alzheimer's, dementia. I don't think it's Alzheimer's, it's dementia, I believe. And her desire to want to lead her people in righteousness. But there isn't much in the beginning that really connects us with her and makes us want to continue reading about her, you know? So I honestly almost DNF'd it. And if it wasn't an audiobook that I had bought, and again, this is another case of a fantasy romance that I feel like is getting a lot of hype, and I've been curious about it for a while, and I've already started it, so I'm going to see it through. And I also heard from people that, like, you know, just keep going, it gets better, and it has. So that's where I'm at right now. I also plan to read How to Marry a Marquis by Julia Quinn. This one was suggested by Jennifer on Patreon. She picked this for me or she suggested that I read this, and I went through the comments and thought that one sounded the best. So those are the books I'm going to read this week. And yeah, I will let you know as I get on with it. I'll see y'all in a bit. Hello friends. Okay, let's do an update on Reign and Ruin. So I am about 3/4 of the way through this now. I've been listening to it most of the day, and I'm kind of still struggling. I don't feel like this book is for me, necessarily. I don't feel like it's bad. I really want to get into what I'm feeling about this book, and some of it, there are some clear positives, and there are some clear negatives, and there are some things about this book, not necessarily that are in the book, but that I'm hearing people talk about this book that are pissing me off. Okay? We're going to talk about that for a minute. So, at 75% of the way through the book, right? 3/4 of the way? Maybe not quite that much. Maybe like 65. I can't tell for sure because I'm listening to the audio and it doesn't give me a percentage on Audible. I feel like this book is very, very slow-paced, and typically I don't mind slow-paced books, because usually that means, and what I feel like makes the difference between a good slow-paced book and a book that just feels slow is character work. So what is happening with these characters? Is there anything really happening with them? Are there character interactions? Is there character introspection? Like, what is happening with the characters? That's what I want to know, right? And I don't really feel like we're getting a ton of that. Now, I've heard a lot of people, mostly people who read adult fantasy, talk about this book, that this is actually a good romantasy. And let me just stop you right there, anybody who feels like that, okay? Because first of all, I feel like, at this point, I'd be hard-pressed to call this romantasy. This very much feels like a fantasy book, which isn't bad. Like, I love fantasy books. Heavy on political drama, heavy on court intrigue. Romance in here is not really happening. This is certainly not a lust-driven romance, so I like that. I don't like lust-driven romances, and that is something that is very common in romantasy. But also, because it isn't lust-driven, then you need to have something else that's taking the place of that. So that is where I feel like we should be getting a lot of good character interaction, where they're building an emotional connection. And I'm not getting that. The emotional connection between these characters, I don't see it. I don't see where it's happening. So the interesting thing is that I feel like when people who don't like romantasy and they're critical of it because it's too lust forward, there's too much spice in it, and like, word, I hear you. I don't like that either. But instead of that being the case here, instead, it's still based on her physical appearance. It's still based on his physical appearance. It is still based on the way that they feel attracted to each other, Did my door just slam? It's still all about, he's beautiful, he's handsome, I'm feeling things for him because I'm attracted to him. And it doesn't go into at this point, any area that feels like what we kind of typically see in a fantasy romance, which is lust. It turns to lust. It's an awareness of those feelings, but it's not really described in that way, so I do like that. But at this point, and that's pretty far into it, that's still all that there is between the two of them, is he talks about how beautiful she is over and over and over. And while at first I found that very endearing and I liked that, I very much prefer a hero to look at the heroine and think about how beautiful she is and how, you know, he's just sort of admiring her and in awe of like her eyes or her hair or even her form. Like, I love that when it's written in that way. But they've had very few interactions up to this point, and the ones that they've had are very much reliant upon an attraction still. So that's where I kind of take issue with this, because it's not... And I feel like my frustration is coming with some of the reviews I've seen about this, when people are like, this isn't lust forward like your typical romantasy. This is like a romantasy that's not like other girls, and that annoys me. It annoys me. Because what is wrong with romance? Nothing. And I feel like this book is giving me vibes of, this is a fantasy romance for people who think they're too good to read romance. It is beautifully written, the prose is good, but what is the prose doing? What is it contributing to the story? Like, that is where I also take some issue with just beautiful prose, because that's something I hear about on TikTok specifically all the time. Beautiful prose, beautiful prose. Okay, why is it beautiful? What's it contributing to the story? Unless it's literary fiction, and even then, the prose needs to be doing something with the characters and with the themes, right? Unless it is that type of book, what is the prose contributing here for? It can obviously just be a beautiful, palatable reading experience, but what impact is that prose having on the story? Like, I was just thinking about Cormac McCarthy, who's one of my favorite authors, and he is very known for his very succinct and very spare prose. He's very deliberate with his word choice. He does not lean into flowery writing, and that is some of my favorite type of writing, when authors have so much restraint and they can be so careful with their word choice and so deliberate that you know that every word is there for an impact. Like, I feel like that is so clever, and I feel like sometimes it's very underrated because it's easier to write flowery, beautiful prose, right? And I'm a fan of that too. Anyway, that was a side tangent, sorry. So I'm kind of struggling with this book. I don't feel like there's an emotional connection between these two. I feel like they're still very much based on looks, which isn't that far away from lust in my opinion, and so then what's the point? What is the point? If we're not going to have a connection that is emotionally based, this is no different than a lust-driven romantasy, in my opinion. That's not entirely true. It's still different. But you know what I'm saying? So I'm feeling frustrated with this. And I also feel like at this point, I hope I didn't mention this earlier, my thoughts are all over the place. At this point, I do feel like if you were to take the romance out of this book, this would stand alone with the political work in here as a fantasy book. And that is a big issue. If you can take the romance out and it stands alone as a fantasy book, that is not a romantasy. That is not a fantasy romance. It's a fantasy with romance, you know? And they're different. They're different. So anyway, I didn't mean to come here and rant. I'm going to go continue working and listen to this, even though I really don't want to. I so badly want to move on to something else because I'm bored to tears, to be quite honest. I'm not getting the character work. I'm not getting the relationship work. I'm getting a lot of political and court drama, which isn't necessarily bad at all. I like books like that. But I was promised romantasy, so where is it? Hopefully next time I'll have to come here and eat my words. I'd love that. I'd love that for me. And for you. Hello, my friends. Okay, so I finished Reign and Ruin. And I will say, so I ended up giving this book 3 stars. And I think that this is not a bad book at all. I think that this is really, really quite well put together. I think that the fantasy in here is super unique. I love the Middle Eastern setting. I really like the whole idea of mages, and that our hero Markham has a death magic, and our heroine Naime has light magic. Like, I thought they were very interesting. I do think the political intrigue in here was really top tier. I think that was excellent. I would go so far as to say that if you really like political intrigue in fantasy, like, this is the book for you. I think my problem with this book most again, it just relies on the romance. I just don't feel like we had enough scenes of the two of them together. We really didn't have enough scenes of the two of them together at all. And the scenes that we did get of the two of them together were really based solidly on how attractive they thought the other person was. It was based on looks. And to me, that sort of feels a little bit too much like a YA fantasy, you know? Of years past, where YA fantasy isn't going to be spicy. It's not going to really, you know, typically it's not going to be spicy, but in YA fantasy or YA romance, there's a huge focus on just physical attractiveness or looks being the driving force in the relationship, you know? And I just really felt like there were not enough scenes in this book of the two of them building a relationship, of the two of them interacting. It was really largely based on looks overall. And while there were some moments that weren't, specifically when Markham was seeing her as she kind of fought to be the Sultana, you know, he admires her, he admires the things that she does, the things that she thinks. He admires so much about her, but it's not really her. It's about her role as a political leader. And that's the thing that I think was just missing so much here. So I feel a little bit of frustration because I've seen so many fantasy readers who are like, this is actually good fantasy romance. And I'm like, so just because it wasn't lust-driven doesn't mean that it was a good romance, because it's still, the basis of their relationship is still their attractiveness to each other. So it's still based on looks. It's still based on something that is shallow. Where's the emotional development between these two? There really wasn't any of that. And there is steam in this book, and it sort of felt like it was just thrown in there just so that there was some steam in here, so maybe it could even be marketed as a romantasy, because I truly don't believe that this is fantasy romance. This is fantasy with a romantic subplot. And just because it has some steam in there, I don't think that slots it very neatly into a romantasy area. So once again, I feel like this was very well written. I think the world was really cleverly constructed, but the romance was really pretty lacking for me. I just really had a hard time feeling like by the time they get together at the end, you know, it just didn't feel real. It didn't feel realistic. And I just can't stop thinking about how, you know, I've been super critical about lust-driven romances and romances that are too spicy, like, because I feel like that takes away from the emotional development. But even though this wasn't like super spicy or super lust-driven at all, it didn't have the emotional development either, because everything was focused on how attracted they were to another. Like, if this man called her beautiful so many times, at first I was very charmed by it, but by the end I was like, but what else is there? You know, that swan princess scene. I'm just sort of like, what else do you like about her other than her beauty? What have you two shared to show me that you've fallen in love? And that's where I feel like, you know, that sense of frustration with how I'm seeing this book recommended, I don't feel like that's coming from people who read romance regularly, because I just don't feel like this is a convincingly built relationship, you know? So am I disappointed with this one? Yeah, I am. And I kind of wish I had taken the time to film this vlog last night, because I think that my thoughts were a little bit more put together. And I am disappointed, but I don't know. I mean, the covers are so beautiful on these books, and the world is so unique, but and even by the time we got to the end of the book, I still didn't feel like I knew both hero and heroine very well. I felt like they were very underdeveloped. Like, I just don't feel like this had the character development that I wanted or the relationship development that I wanted. Was it slow paced before them to get together? Yes. But the thing that was taking the slow pace wasn't building up a relationship, it was building up the political world and that whole plot, which is good and necessary in a fantasy romance. You need background plot, you need a fantasy plot, you need that stuff to keep the story going. This is just a case of where I feel like the balance was off. This was too heavy on the political drama and really nothing on the emotional development. And that's the thing where I feel like I've heard a few people say, like, they, in reviews and things like that, they felt like this had so much emotional intelligence between the couple, and I'm like, where? I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see it. All that I see is him talking about how beautiful that she is, and her talking about how beautiful that he is, and him noticing her looking at him, and in a way that feels very chaste and very wholesome, even though it's very much driven by a physical desire. It's not ever put to words like that, like it's not described in any type of a crass or a spicy way. And I think that's where sometimes maybe people are confusing this with good emotional development, and again, like, it's all subjective, right? It's all opinion. This is just my opinion based on my reading experiences and what I enjoy and what I've read in the past, and I just don't feel like this had any emotional intelligence. I don't feel like it had any emotional depth to the relationship. Not any. There was some. It just didn't have it in a way that was fulfilling to me. It didn't have it in a way that had me so invested and like ready to go to war for this couple. Like I just didn't see it. There weren't enough small moments of them interacting for me to feel like this was a realistic love story by the time they finally got together. I will say there were some moments, the moments when they were together, like you can tell the author really, really was working to give you swoony moments. And it worked. Like some of the lines in here are very beautiful and very swoony. But that's again where I feel like it feels just a little bit hollow because it's beautiful words, but have we seen that? Have we seen any impact of them together? And it makes me think of like Six of Crows, which has one of the most beautiful love stories I have ever read in my life. And there's not really any physical intimacy between them on the page, but there is so much interaction between the two of them that shows them interacting together, that shows them building and having this emotional connection. And it doesn't always have to be physical, and it doesn't always have to be longing looks. Like, I love longing looks, but I need to know, why is he longing for her? It has to be more than she's beautiful. And I just didn't feel like it was giving me that. So I am disappointed. I don't feel like this is the best fantasy romance I have ever read. It's well written. It's well constructed for fantasy. The romance was really pretty lacking for me. So I'm disappointed. Anyways. Moving on. So the next book that I'm going to pick up, which I already actually have, is How to Marry a Marquis. I don't know how to say that. Like, I even Googled it. How to say, and I spelled it exactly how this was. And some people say Marquess, and some people say you should pronounce it Marquess. So I'm going to do How to Marry a Marquess, and I don't know if I'm right. And you can correct me in the comments if you want, but probably everybody is going to be correcting me in the comments. So just maybe see if somebody else has corrected me, and then you won't have to. But alright, my friends, that's it. I'm going to continue reading this book. Oh, first impressions of How to Marry a Marquis, because I'm a couple chapters in. Charmed, utterly captivated. It is a delight and a pleasure to be back in Julia Quinn's writing. I love her writing. I love everything about her writing. It's so bright. It's so fun. She has such a great grasp on her characters. I feel like she has kind of gotten some heat about the Bridgerton books from people who aren't romance readers. Again, like I should do a whole video on that, but I don't want to be a hater. People who aren't romance readers who come into our genre reading romance and have opinions about it, and I'm just like, you don't go here. So, I'm just kidding. I mean, that's one way that we can grow and change, right? But do we want to grow and change? I don't know that we do. Overall, very invested in How to Marry a Marquis. This is our heroine, who is actually the lady's companion to Lady Danbury. Her parents have died. She's trying so hard to support her younger siblings, and she's really struggling, so she feels like, okay, it's time for me to marry. She goes into a library and she finds a book that has said How to Marry a Marquis, and she takes it, Lady Danbury's library, I think, and she's like, okay, it is time. I'm going to find myself a man who's going to support my family. So it just feels like such a delight to be reading this. This is exactly what I needed right now, because I've had a string of books that were kind of disappointing. This is hitting the spot. I'll be back when I have more to say.
Staring at the window on a cloudy morning, trying to lick her wounds while the tea is warming. Sometimes it's like a bird that's never shipped out. Sometimes you go around on a never-ending rail. This week has been a mess, but I'm gonna tell you, we're a bit at work, gonna make it brand new. We're gonna put away for a comeback. We all need some time, and I promise you that. Promise you that. I promise you that. I know this can take a while, but it's gonna be alright, girl.
Hello, my friends. Hello. We're in a new location. This is still my house. This is just what used to be a spare bedroom, and so it probably sounds a little echoey in here. We've since turned it into like a dog playroom. Their crates are in here. We have big, beautiful, nice crates. I'll have to do a video of them because they're so pretty. And all their toys are in here, and it's just a big and empty room so that if they need a big space to come in and play without breaking my walls because they're 150-pound dogs, this is available for them. So anyway, hi, how are you? It's been a few days since I updated you, and I have some updates. Okay, so I finished How to Marry a Marquis by Julia Quinn, and I absolutely loved this. This book was just so charming. It was so fun. It was so sweet. I have zero complaints with this book. And even if I wanted to be nitpicky about some details towards the end, about how our heroine kind of changes when some secrets are revealed, if I wanted to be nitpicky about those, I could be, but they would be very minor nitpicks. I don't even feel like I want to be nitpicky because, you know, I so desperately needed a book like this after I've had a string of just disappointing reads, and I've had like a DNF, and it just, so this feels like perfect timing, perfect book for me. And I do really enjoy Julia Quinn. Like, I really like her books. I think she's so gifted at writing, and it kind of really peeves me off when people who are, I think I maybe mentioned this in a previous clip, apologies about Cosmo barking. He is having a bad time out there. But I feel like with the hype and release of the Bridgerton TV shows, she has recently been under like a lot of scrutiny about her books, and I've heard a lot of people say like her books aren't that great, they're not as good, there are other historical romances that are great out there, and I feel like that's a very uncharitable look at her books, because I think her books are so fun and they are so just comforting and cozy, and I think that's something that I've always really admired about Julia Quinn. And all of this caveat to say, it's not that her books are not without criticism, because she does have some issues in some of her books, right? But if we're talking about like writing style, readability, things that are engaging, things that get you swept away, I think she's really excellent at that, you know? So I feel like this book, I know, is very well beloved by people who like historical romance or people who like Julia Quinn. This is a book that they really, really love. And I 100% see how that is true, because, you know, from the moment you pick up this book, you're immediately sucked into the world and the story. When we have Elizabeth, our heroine, you know, she's trying to financially support her siblings. She's struggling with a lot of some pretty heavy topics about the way her parents died that we get into further into the book. And I think that, again, Julia Quinn, she manages that balance of really heavy, hard topics and sort of a levity that she adds to it, and still maintaining a lot of romance and swoon and humor in parts. I think she has the balance of tone really, really well. And that's something that I feel like I've been a little critical of in a few books that I've read recently, where the tonal shifts were so wide and so vast that it just didn't seem like it fit together, you know? But I think that it works really well here. So we have Elizabeth, who is trying to, you know, support her siblings. Her parents have passed away tragically. Some really heavy stuff has happened with her. And she is a lady's companion to Lady Danbury. And Lady Danbury herself is such a fun character to read about. She provides a lot of great comic relief, and she's also just a very useful character in fiction, because she does things that will promote our couple to be together. And even her cat, who Elizabeth starts out hating and the hero starts out hating, and then they both kind of end up really liking the cat, he plays a major role in this as well, and he adds a lot of comic relief and some heartwarming things. And you know, he's just, the thing that I really like about this book the most is just how every player in here was essential. Even Elizabeth's younger brother, her younger siblings, you know, even the cat. Everything in here was an essential piece of this book that was working to create a feeling here, and working to create plot threads that are going to be unveiled, or things that are going to happen in the plot throughout the book. And I just really, really love that. So our hero is Lady Danbury's nephew. He is the Marquis, but he comes to Lady Danbury's rescue, essentially. She calls him in, saying that she is under blackmail by somebody, and somebody saying that she has an illegitimate child, and she wants him to find out who is blackmailing her. And so that's where he comes in here. He doesn't come in as the Marquis or as her nephew. He comes in as sort of like the, what is it called? Let me look. So he enters the picture as the estate manager. That's what his role is supposed to be. So he and Elizabeth meet, and they have a connection right away. They have some sparks and some chemistry right away. And, you know, Elizabeth has realized she has to marry. She literally has to. She cannot financially support herself and her siblings any longer, so she has to find somebody to take care of her. I feel like I'm too close. Should we zoom out a little? And so she's not even thinking that he is marriage material because she needs somebody who's going to be able to financially provide for her. And she's sort of led to the idea that she needs a man with a title because she finds the book How to Marry a Marquis, and there are a series of like funny things that happen as she's trying to keep the book secret and other people want to find out, including our hero and her sister as well. So he ends up actually finding out that the book that she has is How to Marry a Marquis, and he's like, well, let's teach you how to do this. You can use me. You can practice all of these things on me. And of course they end up falling in love. And this book is just so charming. It is just full of a very sparkling, witty sense of humor. The dialogue is just so realistic and such great banter. Like, I think if you're talking about, you know, historical romances, I think in general are kind of known for having great banter. And I think this one is really excellent, like top tier banter in here. I just love everything about this. There's not any non-essential details. Every detail in this book is important. It doesn't feel like the pages are overly long or the book is overly long. It just feels like this is succinct to tell this perfect story, and that's all you need. So I adored this. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was very romantic. I really loved their relationship. It was just such a fun read, and this is definitely going to be one of my favorite historical romances I've read this year. So shout out to Jennifer, who suggested this title on Patreon when I said, hey, can you give me a book to read and vlog? There were a lot of great suggestions. I picked this one because the audio is available on Audio Plus for free. It's included in your membership there. I looked at the library, at my Libby app, for some of the other books that were recommended, but I have kind of overspent on audiobooks in the last month. So I'm trying to utilize Libby and the Audible Plus program as much as possible. So absolutely loved that one. I thought it was just fantastic and a great time. So now I do want to talk a little bit about The Red Woman and the White Bear. So this is an ARC that I received. This book comes out September 24th. This is a new fantasy romance by a debut author. So I've been reading this book for a couple of weeks, and it's kind of been taking me a while to get finished with it, and I am really kind of struggling with a star rating on this. I probably will end up rounding my good. I'm not sure. To me, this book feels like it's between a 4 and a 5, and because this is a debut author and this is an ARC, I feel like I could be generous and round it up to a 5 because there's a lot of wonderful things about this book. The first thing that I noticed right off the bat is the writing. I think the writing is very solid. Some of the prose in here is very beautiful. It's very thoughtful. She really has a good gift of describing things, and she does it really, really well. So I like her writing. Her writing is very strong. Another thing that I really like about this is the setup is very unique. I feel like the whole world is familiar. It's set in the Fae world. Hold on. Sorry for the interruption. Cosmo had to come in because he was being loud. So, The Red Woman and the White Bear, the gist of it is basically it's set in our modern world, but the Fae world is known by some people to be like right alongside it, mysteriously and hidden. We know this because there are changelings in our human world, which is basically when a Fae child swaps places with a human child, and the human child is taken to the Fae world, and the Fae child stays in the human world. And we also know that there's that crossover between worlds because of Aisling's mother and some memories that Aisling has with her mother talking about the Fae world and how magical it is and everything like that. Like, she has a lot of strong memories about her mother talking about the Fae world like that. So the book is basically about, there's a prophecy that a red woman will arrive or be known, and she's going to bring peace to the kingdoms. So there's the Unseelie court and the Seelie court, right? Those are very familiar if you're familiar with Fae at all. The Seelie is the good, the Unseelie is the bad. And so Aisling, it's spelled Aisling, but there's a part in the book where somebody calls her Ash, so I'm assuming it's Aisling, that's how you pronounce it. So she ends up going to the Unseelie court. She's kind of kidnapped there, and she meets the king, Kale, of the Unseelie court. And he is really a great hero. He's very broody, he's very dark, he's not over the top at all. He has dark shadow magic, and his magic responds to her in a way that it hasn't ever before, and she's kind of able to keep it calm in a way that is different and unique. And he's kind of keeping her captive until he finds out that she is the Red Woman and that she is a threat to his kingdom. But he's already started having feelings for her, so he sort of casts her out and says, get out of here before I have to kill you. And that puts her into the Seelie court, which she believes to be the good court. And when she's there, she uncovers some mysteries that have her questioning what is good and what is not good, and what is my role as the Red Woman if I'm supposed to bring down the Unseelie court, but the Seelie court is also bad or maybe worse, then what's the problem here? And all the while, she has these feelings for King Kale, and I really enjoyed this a lot. I think this author did a really great job of building the story. I think that the characters were really strongly developed. I liked all of them. There is a changeling grown man now who is friends with Aisling, and there's her dog Briar, who is the white bear because he's like a Great Pyrenees. And there are a lot of different fae characters in here that are interesting too. And like overall, I just really loved this story. I loved the romance. I do have a few complaints, and probably the biggest complaint is that I feel like this author adds in unnecessary description to things that we don't need to know, and in a way that isn't like overly wordy. Like, I think her word choice is good, but she spends time describing or giving backstory about things that aren't necessary to progressing the story, and that results in the book feeling really long and dragging the pace down. And there also was a point where the romance kind of like they were separated for a long while, and that also kind of kept it from being like super interesting to me because I was so invested in the romance, even though you're learning things about the world and stuff at that point too. So yeah, I feel like this is probably a solid 4-star, 4.5. But there's so much about this that is good that I'm really tempted to probably just rate it 5 on Goodreads, and this is definitely a book I would recommend. But I would say the caveat being that it's a very long book, and sometimes it feels long because there's just unnecessary detail that's added to it. But I do feel like this author has such potential, and she's so talented, and I really love her storytelling, and I particularly like the thing that she did with the romance, how she made it. At first, he seemed like he was just going to be this complete, brutal death king who was not gonna like love her at all, and the way that he very tenderly starts to feel for her is one of my favorite things. So he is definitely an alpha mellow. Their romance was by far my favorite part, but I just do feel like it kind of got overshadowed a little bit with some of the court politics and the world building, and not that it even needed to be super world building, because I feel like we have a good understanding of fae on our own. Anyway, this was a solid debut. I really enjoyed it. 4.5 stars rounded up to 5 with, again, I feel like I want to be generous because I think this author has a ton of potential, and I really like this and I want more people to read it, but it does have just a few things that I mentioned, right? So anyways, that's it for this vlog. Thank you all so much for being here. If you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me an apple emoji, and I will see y'all in my next video.